Hello everyone, I'm John and welcome to another Arty class tutorial hosted by Shopkeep Arty, the online platform helping everyone to be inspired, learn new things and have fun creating. Today we're zooming to Colorado to join popular watercolor artist Randy Hale to paint a shipwreck. Live is the best way to learn, as you can ask questions directly to the artist as you paint along. If you're watching a recording of this live stream, you can find a full list of materials and reference photos on our video catalogue, the link of which is in the description below. I'd also recommend that you sign up for one of our upcoming free live events. You really won't regret it. So without further ado, let's hit the travelometer to the right of me and we'll go and say hello to Randy. Let's fly there now. So Randy is a Colorado artist, workshop instructor, signature member, juror and conducted workshops for painters throughout the US. He majored in art at Principia College above St. Louis, where his mentor was James Green. He then graduated from California's prestigious Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, where he crafted a solid foundation in composition and design. So let's say hello to him now. I can see him down there. Hello, Randy.
Hey, John, how are you? Good to see you again.
Very well. Now, I think, am I right to say it's 8 a.m. your time now?
Yes, it is 8. And it is, we had a little surprise yesterday or the day before. We had 3 feet of snow dumped on us here in Colorado.
Oh, my
Usually,
goodness.
we have pretty mild climate, but a lot of digging to get up.
That's a huge amount of snow in a short space of time. What climate change, I hear you ask? No.
Oh.
Nope. So I hope you've had a lot of coffee. You're wide-eyed and bushy-tailed.
I've been up since 5, had a couple of cups of coffee. I'm ready to paint.
That's great. And can you believe this is our 5th live show together?
It's fun. I look forward to these. It's a lot of fun.
I know. It's great. Right. Well, I'll let you get ready while I finish my short introduction. So Shopkeep Arty holds a number of live shows throughout the week, and these free weekly Tuesday webinars are designed to give you an introduction to a featured artist, as well as a short, sharp boost of creative inspiration. We're continually hunting out leading artists from around the world, giving you the opportunity of spending some time with them live and experiencing different multicultural influences. Around halfway, we'll take a pause and I'll ask Randy about his upcoming workshop event, which is coming up next week. So without further ado, let's get painting and I'll hand back to Randy. Right, back with you again, Randy.
All right, I'll let you take a look down at my painting.
Please, yeah.
This is where we're going today. We're going to take this old freighter that is pushed up against a reef. We've got sand kind of flowing into the cargo hold that's full of water. And I'm going to set this aside. So
Shiver my timbers.
I'm sorry?
Shiver my timbers. Isn't that a pirate saying? I don't know.
We want to
Hoy, my hearties.
Pirates.
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to get into the character.
All right. Well, here's where we're going to get started. And I've basically got the sky, I've got the ocean, we've got the reef, and we've got the ship. So there'll be 4 major areas within this painting. I'm going to build some clouds up behind the pilot house because the pilot house is going to be a dark positive shape. And we want to have it against a light negative shape so we can really draw attention to that middle ground back there, which will be our center of interest. So what I'm going to do is start off with a little bit of cobalt blue and just add a touch of opera pink. And just
now, if people haven't sketched it out beforehand, what would you recommend? Just to sort of watch and maybe do it later, or
and then you can come back and paint this looking at the YouTube thing. But just enjoy the process here because we're just going to be painting for about 45 minutes. And if you have an opportunity to just kind of absorb what we're doing, you'll be able to then go back and paint when you're looking at the YouTube recording. But I'm going to put in different amounts of cool and warm within my sky and let the water kind of bead up against the edges of these clouds. And I'll soften some of these edges as we move across. But I want to go from basically very pale to a little darker up against this big buildup of cumulus clouds. So we'll drop in a few little warm areas against some of these clouds, and then just add water and let the water kind of roll down, because I've got a couple of rolls of tape underneath my board here to elevate the upper edge of it. And that creates an opportunity for gravity to pull the paint. And these are just big puddles of paint that I'm putting on here. But you can see that there's some warm and there's some cool, and we're alternating back and forth, letting these things just kind of move through the painting. And then I'll soften some of these edges in a moment, but I want to drop down right behind where I'm going to have some trees in the background here. And we'll just paint right through where those trees are. And I'm going to actually bring in a little bit more warmth in a couple spots, maybe through the middle here. That looks pretty intense, but it's very wet. So it just starts diluting and diffusing out into the rest of the painting in different areas.
Peter's asked, what angle is your board?
I've got about a 3/4 inch thick roll of tape underneath here. You can see it's a pretty minimal amount, but it's just enough to get that gravity to pull the water down and bead up against the edges of these clouds. Using a round brush, just a small round, I can come in with a little bit darker value of blue. And I might use a little bit of ultramarine with the cobalt and just drop some of that into some of these wet puddles in a couple of places up against the clouds, so that we can really define some of the edges. And because there's just a puddle of water on my board here, all that dark blue just starts diluting and moving away and into all of the wet shape or area of the sky. And I can always take my board and just lift it up and kind of let that water run through the shape. As that starts to dry, I'll come back in a moment and soften some of these edges, just using the heel of my brush that's clean and slightly damp. And I'll pull some of that into the cloud itself so that we start to soften and have transitions into this, so the cloud isn't just a flat shape. We want to provide the impression of soft shading and shadowing. But as we get down to the bottom of the clouds, they're going to have a little bit of raw umber and ultramarine just to create the illusion of a little bit of shadow on the underside of these billowing clouds. And I'll just soften the top edge and pull some of that dark up into the cloud, so that we're just creating the shadow in the belly of the cloud. Some of this will be a little bluer, some of it will be a little more raw umber, a little bit with more warmth. But the net effect is that we're creating a little shadow in the belly of underneath these clouds, because the sunlight can't quite get in there and really warm up the bottoms of these clouds. So we just add this nice.
Now, Randy, Jennifer asked, that pink that you used in the sky, what color was that?
I'm using opera, which is like a hot pink. You could also use a rose or a magenta, any of those softer colors. I'm also using a little bit of water here to just soften some of these clouds and eliminate any, pick up a little bit of the water. But I also want to leave enough of the white so we see the tops of the clouds a little more defined as stronger white shapes. But I'm going to add just a touch more raw umber in a couple of spots, just to warm up the bottom of these belly of these shadows on the bottom of the clouds. And then once that dries, I'm going to come back in and create a little bit more blue beneath the clouds, so we can see the effect of additional sky behind these clouds. But I need to let this kind of dry a little bit, and maybe just drag a little bit of this down towards the horizon line, just beneath the clouds, with just a very subtle bit of blue. Doesn't have to be consistent all the way across. It's just to create a little bit of lighter, that same blue that's above the clouds, but in a little bit lighter.
Now, Faisal has asked, because obviously this is a shipwreck, and we're also doing a shipwreck in the workshop as well. He's asked, is shipwrecks one of your favorite subjects?
No, I think they're interesting, and I found some photo references of these, and I thought it would be a great opportunity, since we're all housebound, that it would be kind of take a virtual trip to the Caribbean, and it seemed like a great opportunity to do something different and fun. Yeah. And that's why we did it. So I'm dropping in now a little bit more, a little drier bits of blue with some pink in it. right at the edge of where some of these clouds would be, just to kind of reinforce the edges of some of these clouds. And I'll take a little bit of tissue and wick up some of the tops, and then we need to move on. So I'm going to, in the next stage, let's just soften some of the edges of the sky back behind these trees so it dries soft. What I want to do is make sure that that edge on my horizon is dry. So I'm using a heat gun just to evaporate a little bit of that water, because I want to come in with some ocean right along the horizon line, but instead of painting it horizontally, I want to paint it vertically. We will start to see some, I'm using a little bit of turquoise, and I want to get in here and get just a little bit of color back in here that's a little warmer, and come in around this wreck and just pull some shapes down vertically towards the ship. Add a little bit more water in a couple places so that it just is a little bit lighter. And I'm going to
Jennifer's loving your sky, by the way.
Well, thank you. Now we're going to get a little darker over on this side. So I'm going to get this wet, and then I'm going to add some phthalo blue. Phthalo blue is a very staining color, and I want this side of the painting to be darker. So I'm just dragging this down towards the ship. I'm going to be painting darker value on the ship itself. So as this dries, it'll be very transparent. But so I can paint right over, when I do the ship, I'll just paint right over this blue. But for now, I'm just bringing this turquoise, manganese, and phthalo blue down towards the viewer with a darker value. And we want just to get a little bit of this in here to create some vertical reflections. So the clouds might give the illusion of having some lighter areas within that water where they're reflecting. And just dropping a little bit of water into this to let it all flow softly, be kind of loose. And just to make sure that it runs fairly smoothly, I'm going to squirt it with a little misting bottle and just let this water and paint mixture run downhill. And it'll smooth out any brush strokes. It'll create a really nice, soft element for the skies. And I'm going to actually bring in a little bit darker area right in here and right in here between some of these clouds, so that we get the effect of some reflections. And I'm going to bring my water right up underneath the water line for the ship and just wet the paper a little bit. I've got a few little dry spots that I left there, and we'll just leave those. I'm going to wick up any of this additional water along the edge of the boat where it's run downhill, so the bead, and we'll let that dry. I'm going to pick up a little bit of that excess water that went up into the sky beneath the clouds. I'll come back and put just a touch of purple along that horizon edge later. But for now, I want to get into the sand. So I'm going to clean all this blue out of my mixing well and start working with some raw siennas, some gamboge.
Marie France from Mexico asked, do you have any particular brand of watercolor that you prefer?
I'm using a mixture of some Holbein and some M. Graham in my palette. And on occasional, there's a few colors that I use, like Schmincke's transparent orange. I just love the transparency of that particular color. And I also like Sennelier's yellow ochre instead of raw sienna, because the yellow ochre from Sennelier, which is a French watercolor, mixes and plays so much nicer with the cobalt for skies if you're trying to get a little bit of warmth in your sky.
Now, is it possible you could move your board up just slightly, because it's just fallen off the bottom?
Absolutely. I went to...
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
How's that look? Better?
When we were showing the rolls underneath, and it just...
And I've got to smooth out a little bit of my sky here. I've got some stuff happening there that I got a little bit more water right up against the edge, and it starts to bloom. So this is a good time to catch things like that, because then you can come in while the paint is still a little bit damp and soften some edges, pull some of these down into the clouds, and still retain the whites, even though they might have a little bit of value on them. And I'm just picking up a little bit of the white in a few places here just to soften and make those clouds feel a little brighter. I'm going to add a little bit of pink to some of those clouds now that the water has started to, the paper has started to dry a little bit, just in a couple of places. And then I'll clean my brush, rinse it, and just smooth it.
What paper are you actually using for this?
I'm sorry?
What paper are you actually using for this?
This is a Fabriano 300-pound cold press. And it's also the bright white. I like the bright white paper because then my whites really pop. And that's an important thing is when you're working with negative shapes with watercolor, you want to be able to really get that nice contrast. So I'm going to bring in a little darker pigment right up against some of the clouds here. Clean and rinse my brush, and then just kind of feather this back up into the sky. Keep rinsing my brush to get all the color out of it. So it just is a very soft transition away from that darker edge of the clouds. But that just helps define the shape. Now, let's go back into this. This water is starting to dry a little bit. I want to get a little bit of warmth down in the hull of this ship beneath the water while the paper is still slightly damp. So I'm going to come right in at the water line with a little bit of raw umber. And then in a couple places, I'll come down and add a little bit more, clean my brush, and push this damp brush right up against the bottom edge of that drier paint and let it kind of feather down through this wet paper to give the illusion of looking through the water. And I want to pick up a little bit of purple. I'm using a cool purple. It's like an ultramarine violet or a bluish violet. And I'm going to start introducing a little bit of an edge along this reef, using the purple. And then I'm just going to soften this a little bit with water along the upper edge and just pull some of this down into the water, the body of water, so it looks like it's just kind of flowing. And we'll pull a little bit of this along. I'm not going to get up into here because I want to bring all this as a lighter sandy color in a moment, but I'm just pulling this into the wet shape so that letting the water move that pigment around. And it just does a wonderful job of softening things and making it feel like it's water. And I've got a little bit more phthalo blue. I'm going to drop it right along the edge of the bow of the ship. And this paper is still wet, but it's not so wet. And it's just like a little bit of a shadow out here in the bow is casting. So now I want to get a bigger brush and go back now to my gamboge and a little bit of the yellow ochre and see what we can come up with for some sand. And this is we're going to really wet this pretty nice. I want to get all of this shape in this lower corner of the painting very wet. I'm just laying down some soft color. This is a base color. It'll touch some of that purple in a few places, but I want to leave a little bit of dry edge to there so I can define this warmer color. And then pick up some brighter color right through the middle of this painting so we really feel like it's got some brightness in the reef that we're looking through, but it's wet. So it takes that quinacridone gold and just diffuses it through the wet shape. I also want to put a little bit of this up in the ship in a moment. I think right up in this one corner, we've got some sand in the hull. So I'm going to put a little bit of that in there, and it's coming around the corner and flowing right across the reef. And if I go right through this wet shape with the warm against the purple, it just makes a really nice soft transition. And now I'm going to pick up a little bit of a rustier color just to drop in so I get a little, this is like a burnt sienna and it's wet. So I'm painting wet and wet, but I'm putting these little darker spaces where the reef might have some variation within it. And we'll just let the water kind of move this around. Before this dries, I want to get up in here and get it lighter and lighter as we move back towards the rear of the ship. And I want to get just an opportunity to get some water on this to let it run downhill towards the bottom of the paper. It's going to smooth out a lot of this stuff that we just painted on there and give it a very soft quality. But the important thing is right as we get closer to the viewer, right in here, we want this to be pretty bright. And then
Just to remind Linda, did you wet the paper before you started the
no,
paint?
I'm painting with a ton of water on my brush.
Very
I'm
wet brush.
letting the brush strokes wet the paper, but I started with dry paper, and it works to my advantage this way. I want to bring some of this spillover of sand right into the cargo hull of the ship. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of gamboge and drop a little of this in here, so it just flows right across the gunnel of the ship into the ship. And I'm going to probably let this dry before I put the water in the ship, because I want to be able to see this beautiful transparent gold color of the sand. And if I put the turquoise green or the emerald green water in the ship, I'm going to lose that. So I have to let this dry, and then I'll glaze over that with the next thing. So what this requires is that we move away from this area and start painting somewhere else, so that we can have an opportunity for this to dry.
Could you just repeat the colors you used for the sand for Louise, please?
It's a combination of yellow ochre,
Yeah.
gamboge, and a little quinacridone gold. That
Thank you.
typically does the trick.
And did you stretch the paper beforehand, out of interest?
No, this is 300-pound paper. People always ask me about stretching. I'm pretty lazy, and I do a lot of painting. And back, a couple centuries ago when I was in college, everybody stretched their paper. They stapled it down, and they did all this amazing, gluing it down with the gum adhesive around the edges. With 300-pound paper, I just tape it down with masking tape, and it doesn't buckle, and it works great. And by the time I'm done and it's dry, I just pull the tape up and I'm done. But if I tried to stretch all this in like 140-pound paper, it would just take too long. And I like to paint constantly. I'm doing a lot of painting.
Yeah.
So at any rate, what I'm trying to do is get this a little bit dry, so I can come back in with some darker paint. And to allow this to kind of dry by itself initially before I hit it with a heat gun, I'm going to come back in and work on my trees back here, because my sky and all of this is dry. And I want to pick up some really nice warm colors for tropical vegetation. So I'm using a little bit of raw umber, a little bit of sap green for a warmer color, some of that yellow ochre in there as well. And I'll just kind of pull some of this down, and I'm not going to paint the whole tree. That I'm going to rinse my brush and get a little bit of Prussian blue and raw umber to add some dark value to it. And we'll just start introducing darker colors.
And Sharifa said that she lives in Superior, Colorado, and was hammered by the blizzard yesterday. And it's really relaxing to watch you paint, Randy. You're amazing. So thank you to Randy and John.
And what I want to do is get the middle part of this tree down in the shadows even darker. So I'm using some really dark value and adding a little bit of raw umber to it with the Prussian blue. And I'll scrape out some of the tree trunks and things that we might be seeing through this. But I'm using the back end of my brush handle and just pulling it out of this puddle of paint. And I can add cooler blues, like a Prussian blue in there to get it darker. I've got some nice warm tones in there. And I'm going back and forth with all these different cools and warms to create the illusion of a lot of stuff happening with this vegetation without having to paint much detail. And just coming out of this big shape with a few tips of the edge of the vegetation really tells the whole story. I'm going to drop a little bit of sap green in here, which is a little warmer. And we'll just kind of pull this down. I want to get this a little darker. So I'm going to add ultramarine and burnt umber to get some of the shadows on the underside of this tree coming down into this little bit of land. And there's a beach below it. So I'm going to clean and rinse my brush and get a little bit of buff or One Brilliant number 1, and just soften this and push this beige, really light flesh tone beige, right up into this darker value.
Louisa asked, how do you avoid muddy colours when you're painting wet on wet? Is it the colours and the pigments you choose?
Get in and get out. lay your color down and leave it alone.
Right.
Because if the more you go back in and touch things, once that pigment has started to settle down into the paper, then immediately it starts to bloom. Now, I'm also going to clean my brush, and I'm just going to tap a little bit of water off the tip of my brush into this really wet bunch of paint, and it's going to create some blooms that are just going to add all kinds of texture that looks like vegetation. So I don't have to do a lot of the work. I let the water do the work for me, and it creates these amazing effects that give the illusion of lots of detail, when in reality there's very little detail painted in. We're letting the water create that detail. And I'm just dropping in, while this is sitting on the surface of the paper, darker value, very wet. And now that'll start to dry. And once that starts settling down into the paper and into the fibers of the cotton, I can't really do much more with that. It's done. If I do, it'll just start getting really, really muddy. So we'll leave that to kind of do its thing. And I'm going to watch it, keep an eye on it, because once it starts losing its shine, then it starts getting a little bit more of a matte finish. I can take a sharp, tip of the back of my brush handle, and I can scrape out some tree trunks and limbs and things that maybe the sun is just catching a glint of, and it adds a little sparkle back there that's fun. But if you do it too soon, you're scarring the paper. If you do it too late, the paint's too dry and you can't scrape it away. So it's a timing issue where you have to hit it just right, where the paint is still damp on your paper, but it's lost the runniness of water. The viscosity is a little oilier. So you're literally pushing aside that pigment to create that illusion. Now, while that's doing its thing, I'm going to take my flat, and I want to create, I'm going to check my sand here, and I'm going to add a little bit more rust in a couple of these spots. See how this all kind of filtered and spread out really nice? I'm just going to come back in with a few little marks here that create some darks where there's crevices within the reef. And I'll drop some raw umber into that burnt sienna, maybe a little bit of blue in a couple places, so it looks a little darker in a few spots. And then I'll just hit it very lightly with a mist bottle, so it just softens those edges, like we're looking through water, and we're just not seeing a lot of definition there. It's just kind of a suggested shape of water. I can even add a little bit of blue in here and kind of dry my brush off and move some of that back through there. If you don't like it, just pick it up a little bit and add a warmer color like a burnt sienna.
But so Sandra said that this scene reminds her of Lake Superior, because there have been many shipwrecks there, including and unfortunately the Edmund Fitzgerald. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So I was up there in the northern shore of Lake Superior a couple summers ago doing a workshop, and loved that area. It's just gorgeous. Different look to everything. All right, now.
So what was the Edmund Fitzgerald then, Randy?
What's that?
The Edmund Fitzgerald, was that a boat that ran aground or something?
Yes, it's a famous shipwreck that went down. I think it was in the 20s. It was not too long ago. But I'm going to make this a little darker in a couple spots where the reef is submerged, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of phthalo blue, which has a little bit of depth to it and feels aqua, and then just add water to that. Just push water up against some of these darker deposits of paint, and I can create the illusion of a ledge and then soften some of these edges as we come across them. So they just really get softer and they lose definition, but we see just enough edge that we know what we're looking at. And I can pick up a little bit of warmer color and drop some gamboge in here in a couple of spots and just give the illusion that we're looking down through water at this big reef that this ship is run aground on or pushed up against. I want to get a little darker back in here, a little more warmth. And we'll just let that do its thing. I don't care really how much it runs. I just want the water to give the illusion that it's really very fluid. All right, now I want to go back and check my water, or how wet the paper is. And I'm going to dry this where the hull of the ship is open so I can glaze over the top of it. And this heat gun evaporates the water pretty quick. It doesn't completely dry it, but it allows me to come back in with a wider brush and start putting in some warmer colors. And I'm going to get a deeper aqua. This would be like a phthalo blue. And I want to start kind of right up in this hold here and come down around some of these areas, and then warm it up with more of an emerald color. See if we can't get that as we start to get down closer to the viewer.
So thank you to Trina and Virginia. Both of you have told me that there's a famous song about the Edmund Fitzgerald. I'll have to look it up. Virginia said it was the Gordon Lightfoot song, so I'll have to try and look that up at some point. And Trina's asked, does the £300 paper hold the water longer than the £140?
Yes, it does. That's another nice thing. I can work with this being wet for a long time, and it really is to my advantage. I'm adding some sap green, Prussian blue to this phthalo blue amount, and I'm going to just let this kind of run across. I don't want to kill that warm color in there. That's more.
So Marie France asked, is there any difference in working with a heat gun versus a hairdryer? And yes, really, because the hairdryer will push the paint away, and it makes it, exactly, whereas the heat gun is just heat, so you don't get the splattering of the paint if it's really wet. So it's a good technique.
Now I'm pulling a lot of these dark colors vertically, so I have a nice soft transition, and I want to pick up a little bit of purple color. I'm get the wrong color here. Let's get some purple, and I want to introduce that we're seeing part of the damaged hull through this water, and I want to just drop some purple into that phthalo blue, just to make that water feel a little darker in a couple of spots. And we'll leave that like that. And I'm going to get a drier amount of the phthalo blue right down in up against the edge of the ship. And I'm going to tip my board up and let this water just kind of run into that wet shape, and let these colors all kind of blend together into a wet and wet type effect. And it just gives a really nice, I'm going to hit it with a squirt gun. If you ever want to get your water to run across the surface, just get about half a squirt with a fine mist bottle, and it lifts the pigment up off the surface of the paper and moves it across the surface very gently and gives you a beautiful transparent effect. And I'm pulling some of this water right across into the sandy area so that we feel like it's really pretty nice and rich. And I'll get this dark right up against the depth of the hull and the hold of that ship. Now we also have a little part of the ship has decayed or fallen apart. So I'm going to put a little of that same green, sea green, that's phthalo blue and the sap green, right into this area where the deck has given way. And we'll let that dry, and I can come back in and paint the rusty hull of the ship in a moment after this all dries. But for now, you can see right through the ship into some of the water beneath it, and I'll put some dark shadows and so on around there. But I want to get this nice and rich and dark right up underneath the shadow here of the opening of the hull.
Yeah. Now we're sort of at the halfway mark, so I don't know when would be a good time to just take that pause, Randy.
We could do that and let this dry a little bit.
Okay, that's good. Let's do that now.
Oh, so wait, how we do that? I want to get this the tree trunks. See what happens here when we time it right. We can pull out some of the white of the paper just by catching the paint as it starts to dry a little bit. And it looks like we're seeing parts of that tree trunk. And I'm glad we caught that before we went to the next step.
Okay.
Go ahead, John.
Great, thank you. So, how are you enjoying it? It's really taking shape, isn't it? Do you feel like you're in the Caribbean, or as Sandra and Trina have said, maybe you feel like you're at Lake Superior? So Sandra actually said that Gordon Lightfoot sang the song about it in 1975. That it's a beautiful place to come and paint. Everyone needs to go to Lake Superior. I think she's inviting us all. So we're all invited. I'll liaise with Sandra, work out when's a good date. We'll have a few hundred people. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you for that offer. Anyway, so if you are watching this on YouTube, mean a huge amount if you could press the thumbs up. It ensures that YouTube recommends the class to more people, helping us spread the benefits of creativity to a wider audience, young and old alike. So thank you. This 45-minute Artie class is designed as a sort of prelude to a full 2 to 3 hour workshop webinar by the artist. And with more time and restricted numbers, our workshop webinars are more relaxing and exclusive, but just as fun. You also get to speak directly to the artist if you want, so you can pick up a lot more of their tips and tricks. The price to attend Randy's upcoming workshop webinar is just £35, which works out at about £11 per hour or $15 US. So it really is great value. And the workshop will be taking place in a week's time, next Tuesday, the 23rd of March at 3:30 p.m. So an hour and a half later than today's Artie class. So, Randy, what have you got planned for next week?
This is, we're going to do another shipwreck, similar thing, but it's another one that's pushed up against a reef.
Yeah.
Hopefully you can all see this. I'm trying not to set it on, actually, I'm just going to pick up this other painting and move it out of the way. But you can see that we've got a very far distant reef up towards the horizon. We've got some different shaped clouds, a little bit bigger island with some palm trees. But this hulk of a wreck, this tropical treasure, I call it, is the current has just kind of pushed it up against the reef. It has nowhere else to go, and it's grounded on the beach. And we'll put some current in the water. We'll go from dark to light. We'll have lots of movement across here. The hull is basically looks like a big shoe. It's not that complicated. We've got some dark in here to show or represent the depth of the looking inside the wreck. But it looks really involved. But the reality is, as we take this step by step, we've got some really nice elements of sky, far distant reef, and foreground water, with the wreck being the center of interest. So I think it'll be fun to paint.
Because you have a bit more time, obviously, you're adding that level of depth to the painting, which obviously is very difficult to do in 45 minutes. And also, Randy will be taking you step by step through it. So we'll be able to go through in stages.
I'll just paint a little bit, and then you guys can watch me do it, and then I'll let you have 5-10 minutes to paint it, and then we'll go on to the next step, and we'll go through the whole painting step by step, allowing everybody the opportunity to paint what I've just painted. And I don't want to get too far ahead. I want to just do it in small bites so that it's easy for you to replicate the effect that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, perfect. Well, it sounds really great. So if you are interested in joining us next week, I'm going to launch a special hot ticket now, as I tend to do in these live events, which gives you 10% off, and it's exclusively for live viewers, as it's only available for the next hour. So let me just show you how you can do that. So you head over to our website, shopkeeparty.com. You click on live events, and on the live events you scroll down and you'll see Randy's upcoming workshop just there. So you click on the workshop button and it takes you to the workshop page, and on there it's got all the details of what Randy's been talking about now, including the reference painting, picture, the line sketch, etc., and a full list of materials that is recommended. You've also got a 10% off if it's a new account on Jackson's, and I messaged Hanadi earlier about how you can do that if you've already got an account. Then you click on the link there and it'll go through to Randy's shop, and you've got the webinar and the video. If you want to pre-order the video, we've got the full video cost, but also you get a massive discount if you have paid to attend the live workshop. Once we've got the videos up and running on our website, you'll be able to then go to our full catalogue, and we'll obviously unlock it for you once you've purchased it, and you'll be able to then scroll down to that particular workshop and press the watch button, and then you'll be able to watch it to your heart's content for as many times as you want on multiple devices, which is why we do it this way. You can watch it on your tablet, your phone, your computer, wherever you are in the world, so it makes it super easy. Anyway, hopefully that helps. Right, Randy, let's get back for the second half.
Okay, we're ready to start on the ship.
Brilliant.
I'm going to mix up a little bit of rust color for this pilot house. I'm going to use the transparent orange and a little bit of burnt sienna. And we'll start with a pretty bright, deep orange. And I'm going to make sure I capture a pretty crisp edge of the profile of the top of this roof line, and then just bring it down so we have a base color, and it's very wet. And I'm just pulling this down towards the deck. And I want to get a little lighter over here, so I'm going to use a little bit of gamboge mixed with the orange, and we'll have a little brighter color right over here where the sun might be hitting part of this deck. But then I'm just going to rinse my brush and pull all this down into the this basic shape of the deck of the ship, and allow that water to just move around through there. As that starts to dry, I'm going to add some darker colors to that to really enhance it. But I want to pull this right across as a base color for all of the ship. And we've got different parts of the deck, but it looks pretty light. I'm going to come back and get very, very dark in a few places, but I've got to get this base coat established just to get those rust colors in there. See if I can't get a little bit more dark right up against the cloud there. So really
Trina's asked for the workshop, Randy, should they pre-sketch the outline for it, would you think, or would you do that?
Yes, I provide a line drawing for you. I'd like to have that line drawing already done on the paper so that when we start painting, we're talking about painting. We're not dealing with the drawing element.
Yeah.
If people don't have that done in advance, it puts them way behind. And I think you're going to be a lot happier if you can be prepared and ready to paint when I start painting. And I'm just dropping some darks now down into some of these elements that really give us contrast with the water behind this ship. And if we don't get that nice bright orangey rust color, but have some darks to it, it loses its contrast and effectiveness. So this is pretty wet, and I can take some of this and just blend it right down into the water and let it all just kind of flow, because once it dries, I'll come back in and add a few darks in a couple of spots just to really punch it up. And this looks pretty dark now, but when it dries, it's going to be very pale. So this is your base color, and you need to work quickly with this to get it all down. And then you can come back and enhance it later with other elements. Now I'm going to work on the hull and the bow, and that's got some pretty dark elements, but I've got to establish the base color initially again. So I'm going to start up on the top here with a little bit lighter, more transparent color, let it run right into these other colors, and just bring it around and just all the way down across the hull into the bow to the waterline. And it's just one big flat shape. And if we get too busy trying to, put a lot of detail into it at this stage, we're going to make mud. So we want to just establish that nice bright, it looks garish at this point. I think I lost your picture here. Let me get this back.
Yeah. Just need to do it on landscape. Yeah, perfect.
Here we go. And you can see how bright that is, but that's the underpainting. We're going to come back on top of this and get some really nice colors that give a lot of depth to what's going on in this painting. So we'll just let that dry for a moment. I'm going to actually take my heat gun to accelerate some of the drying process so we can keep moving through this demo. I see I've got some of this has gotten down into the water, creating some ugly marks. So I just smooth that out a little bit. And it looks very kind of blotted in there, but that's okay because that's looking through the water. And as this starts to dry, you can see we've got all these other colors moving across the shape. I want to get underneath this overhang where the pilot house is. So I'm going to get a little bit of burnt sienna and add a little bit of ultramarine to that. And that's going to make a really nice, rich dark. And I want to use a smaller brush so I can get some windows in here too. I want to just create the illusion of some darks that come in underneath. And we'll come back in and punch those up later with drier paint. But right for now, I want to get a few of these little darks in here to establish the contrast around this housing. We'll leave a few lights showing through there, or lighter values, just skipping some of the shape, letting the lighter value come forward. And then as I get down into this hole that's in the ship's hull, I'll get more of the orange going and add a little bit of ultramarine to that. And we'll come in underneath that to show where the depth is in this hull as we look through these parts underneath that are exposed down into the hull. I'm going to take a little bit of this and create some elements in there that look like structure. We don't know what they are, but it just suggests structure that we're starting to see little bits of through the gaps in the hull. I'm going to put a few more little openings in there, and then come back to this little raised area and put some darks in around that just to define that a little bit. And then against the hull here on the gunnel, we're going to punch that up with a little bit more blue, which makes it look very dark. We might have some little edge incidents there that raise that up and look like there's little elements that are coming through there. I want to get a little bit of dark right up against this area, clean my brush, push some damp brush up against that so it just feathers back along the edge there. And I want to just pull this down to get a richer, darker area coming forward. And we'll just pull that across. That's a little too much, so I'm just going to blot some of that up. And we can come back after this is dry on the pilot house, dry that. And now I mentioned I was going to put some windows in there. I'll take a small round with some of the dark that I've already got mixed up in my palette, and I just put a few little shapes that look like there might be openings in the surface of this building or the housing.
Now, is it possible, Sue asked, is it possible to see Randy's palette? Could we have a sneak peek at your palette, Randy?
Kind of dirty. See all the mixture? I've got some sea greens, I've got some orange and blue, I've got some purples, and I just go back into those little, messy areas, and that gives me the hue or the pigments that I'm looking for. Now I want to get a little bit of more shadow back in this area here, so I'm going to pick up some burnt sienna and just drop it in behind this just to glaze over this a little bit. So we feel like this one little element is coming forward, and we're recessing a little behind that. Get some more blue darks and come across here. Just throw some darks in there. And then I'll take my, once that starts to lose a little bit of its shine, we'll come back in and put a few little scrape outs in there that suggest there's highlights.
Marie-France said you definitely get the Caribbean colors.
And I normally don't paint with Caribbean colors, but what I do work with are very staining, transparent colors. You can always dull down a brighter color, but you can't brighten a dull color. So I always try to maintain in my palette pigments that have a real high staining capacity, and that means that they're very transparent. Now, I want to get the light coming in from the upper right of my painting, so I'm going to make this corner a little darker, and I just put a little bit of paint on there, and I'm just feathering this away to make it look like we're hitting a corner there, and just glazing across this, and just pushing water up against that dark, and it starts to make it feel like there's a little bit of a corner that we're running up against. And then we've got some other elements up in the top here. I want to get a few of these things coming out of the housing. There's just a couple of little divots and things, and maybe we'll take a small rigger, pick up some of the darks that we're working with, and just create some really fine lines that just kind of suggest that there's some elements there. I want to use a liner. This is a very fine little thing, and I want to just give the illusion of maybe a ladder or something that's coming down off the side of this thing, and it's kind of decayed. It might not be all in one piece, but they're just little elements that we can add interest to our center of interest back here. And this is where we wanted. Everything kind of pulls us back to this area here. Now, I'm going to let that dry. And in order to let that dry, I've got to go somewhere else in my painting. So I'm going to come back and work on the painting over this bright orange on our bow of the ship. And I'll pick up some darks, particularly right up on the bow. And I'm using the same color I used under the shadows there for the housing of the pilot house. And I'm just running it right down the length. I'm going to get a little more burnt sienna and ultramarine in there in a couple places. Come around, there's a little bit of a ribbing or something along the edge here. And I'm just adding a couple of notes with my flat, and then push, after I rinse my brush, I just push a little water up against some of these little elements and pull them downward, maybe even soften some of the edge along that dark of the bow. And then I'm going to use a smaller brush and get a little bit of a dark coming in a couple spots right underneath the water where we just see bits and pieces of dark along the water line. And I'm also going to get a little bit more orange. I'm looking at my reference here. I want to get this really to kind of come downhill as striping. Clean and rinse my flat and just wet this on one, a couple of sides of this and let this, these vertical stripes pull some of this darker, richer color. In this case, I'm going to add a little bit of ultramarine blue to that and just let it, because my board's elevated and this is now wet, look what it's doing. It's following that wet shape and it's just running downhill like kind of a deteriorated patina that you would see. And I want to get the right along here a little darker. So you really start to feel that patina of aging and weathering that you get. And then I'll just drop a little bit of water in there in a couple spots just to see if we can get a little bit of blooming going on within that. So it looks like the barnacles and the ocean has just played havoc with this metal surface of this ship. Now I've got to come back on the inside of the deck up against this railing. So I'm going to come back with darker color there as well, just to make it feel like it's up behind that edge of that ship. And I'll just take water and feather away the top edge of that, add a little bit of warmth to it in a couple spots. And now I'm just going to take my flat, where did I put it? Rinse it. So it's just wet and slightly damp. I wipe most of it off. And I just pull that around so it just kind of moves across the decking, but it stays lighter farther away and it gets darker the closer it gets to the viewer right behind this rail. So it feels like it's on a horizontal plane, even though it's at a little bit of an angle. We feel like this gets lighter farther away. And then I'm going to put a little bit of structure up here with some detail just to make it fun. And we'll come back in with a few little elements. I'm just using the edge of my flat to capture some of these elements. And I'll scrape some things out here in a little bit after this darkens, just so that and it starts to dry, so that we see some sparkle of debris and so forth that's on that deck. I'll put some shadows in, but while that's losing its shine, I'm going to come back in and put a little bit of dark underneath where the opening of this hatch is in a couple spots, just to kind of reinforce the edge and the underside of this opening. And that dark really helps define it. I'm going to come down a little bit right in here, get this nice and dark against that light sandy area behind it, so there's value contrast. And I just add water to some of the back edge of that mark, so it just flows into the surface or the side of that hull. I kind of like what's happening now. I'm going to go back in while that's drying and just drop a few little things into the reef just to introduce some darkening. Like there's little areas of recesses within this reef. Rinse my brush and just soften the bottom edge of some of these marks and let the water just kind of pull that dark into the orange that's already there. So we just feel like there's little bits and pieces of dark as we look across this reef. I'm going to get a little bit of raw umber, mix it with whatever I've got here in my palette, and just get lighter values of dark as they go back away from this ship. And we'll just throw a little bit of something back in here. I think what I want to do is get a little bit of value in this white area here. So I'll just get some
Just
raw.
to give you a bit of a time check, because we're sort of coming up, we've just got a minute or so left.
Oh,
So
we're almost done. Now, while we're waiting for the hull of the ship to dry, or the front deck, look at this, how it's starting to get a little bit of a bloom. If I take just a little bit of water on the tip of this round and I drop it into this, it immediately reacts with that darker pigment. And now we're starting to get this organic bloom that looks like the rust and the patina. While that is reacting, I'll take this 1-inch flat, clean it, and get a little bit of purple, not too dark, just a little bit of light purple on the edge of my brush. And I'm cleaning out an area in my palette just so I have a nice opportunity to keep it pure. And it's a glaze. It's not a real deep dark purple, and I don't want my brush to be too wet, but I'm going to put a little bit of a shadow on the horizon line underneath these clouds. And that just sort of suggests that the clouds are creating a bit of a shadow that darkens the horizon, and that purple just gives it that effect. And I'm just going to soften that purple and pull it right down into the body of water. I've got to make sure my brush doesn't have any brown on it. So we just soften this and pull it in away from the horizon line, just to soften it.
yeah, it's an effective technique, that, isn't it?
And I'm going to go back and get a little bit more purple. And then get some phthalo blue. Pure phthalo blue is a glaze, not too thick, not too dark. And just start coming downward and darken my water here on this side of the painting, so that we go from a fairly dark to a very light from left to right. And that creates movement across this ship that draws our eye through the painting. And it just, that's the movement that you want to see when you're creating, taking your viewer to somewhere in the painting. And we want to bring them over to the right side of the painting. So we've got to have this movement occurring that pulls our eye.
Now I'm going to call time on this. I can let you keep just tinkering with it, but I'll just sum up at the end now, Randy, because we're sort of at time now. But what an amazing... Randy's done such a great job there, because he's actually completed a painting, which is actually quite difficult for the level of complexity within 45 minutes for that particular one, while guiding us through every step of the way. I think he did a fantastic job. And how did you get on? I know Randy and I would just love to see what you've come up with once you've done it. I know some of you maybe just watch this, but later you'll watch the replay on YouTube or whatever, or via our video catalogue. So when you've done it, there's a link in the description on YouTube to our Facebook post, or just go to Facebook and search for Shopkeep Arty. And if you can share your painting underneath that would be fantastic. And then we can see it, and you might get a comment or two from Randy as well, which is really great. As we near the end of the show, if you've got any words that you'd like me to pass on to Randy for you, now's your time to write that. So write that in the Q&A or on live chat if you're on YouTube. While you do that, I want to turn my attention to our most important attendees, our patrons. Being a patron is not only the best way to save money on our exclusive workshop webinars or get access to our entire video archive, but the monthly contribution you make also helps support our channel and helps us keep these free classes going throughout the year. This week I've got some new patrons to welcome to our exclusive Arty community. So let me press that other button behind me, the round one, the button of thanks, and say thank you to Amanda Chapman, Helena Poshezja Chorus. That was a terrible pronunciation. I know I got that wrong, so sorry. Talika Chidari, Andrea Watson, Christine Cheshire, Sue Clark, Peter Carbon, and Hanra. So thank you so much, everyone, for your support. And I know you'll enjoy all the special events coming up. In fact, we've got an arty-inspired show tomorrow with quite a famous framing company where we're actually going to be discussing how to frame your art and how to get the most out of it. So it's going to be a fascinating little interview, that. So really fantastic. So it's the end of another great arty class. If you do want to join Randy and I for the full workshop event, don't forget to head over to our website now. Before I go, let me go back to Randy and I'll go through some of the comments. So, Randy, are you there? I know you're busy. Karen said, absolutely fantastic as always, Randy. Thank you so much. So interesting. Can't wait to have a go at the workshop. Peter Harris, absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Randy. Sis, thanks, Randy, as always. Sis from New York City. Maureen, fantastic tutorial, Randy. Love the subject and your pace was doable. Thank you. Then Liz, thank you so much. Brilliant. Hazel, brilliant. Thanks, Randy. See you again next week. Trina, another absolutely fabulous and brilliant class. I love Randy's teaching and painting style and I'm very excited to paint my shipwreck. Dina, Randy, this is my first demo with you and I learned so much. Thank you, tons. Sydney, thanks so much, Randy and John. Margaret, when does the UK change to summon time? I don't know, Margaret. I think we'll probably need to work that out on YouTube, on Google. Shirley, many thanks, Randy. Another great session. Thank you, John. Joy Smith, great demo. See you next Tuesday. Linda, thank you. It was a great picture, lovely colouring. I wonder if I'm going to find a pirate hat for next week for the workshop. I don't know.
Yeah, you better.
Or a parrot or something. That would be quite good. Pretty Polly. I have to do a parrot impression. Yale, thank you for a fantastic webinar. I enjoyed it very much. Trina, the sun's finally come up out here. Ludmila, I love the colours Randy chooses. Amazing contrast, soft and hard edges. Thank you. Elizabeth, thank you, Randy. You explain everything and so clearly. Wonderful tropical colours. Kathy, loved it. Beautiful colours. Margaret, lots of fun. Thanks so much. I'll go to your painting actually while we're doing this. Janine, thank you. Superb. Sis, may we see the painting again? Oh, there we go. I was one step ahead there, Sis. Marie France, great demo, Randy. Love your work. Cheryl, loved this painting. Thank you, Randy. Sharifa, amazing and fabulous tutorial. Thank you. Louise, absolutely marvellous. Eureka, last weekend in March. Karen, Monty Python springs to mind. Oh, what was that for? Oh, the parrot. Yes, the parrot. There we go. I got you, Karen. Now, some great comments. There are always too many. I haven't got to the YouTube one, so sorry about that, YouTube. Thank you for joining us. And if you're taking part in Amit Kapoor's workshop live from New Delhi on the other side of the world, I'll see you there in about 25 minutes. So if not, I hope to see you tomorrow at our Arty Inspired show, or even this Thursday when we're going to be hosting world famous fine art professional Michael Jazowicz live from Poland. Anyhow, it's goodbye from me, but obviously goodbye and thank you so much to Randy.
Well, thank you. We'll see you guys,
Randy. Big round of applause. Thank you so much, and really looking forward to seeing you next week for your workshop.
Thanks again, guys.
Take care.